you can find peace and healing from it. It can be like the scariest thing in the world to visit your pain and to stare it in the face and to bring it up and to talk about it. But it is the one thing that makes it not have control over you anymore. Like, and that was something I found for me to be very true. As much as I still have to manage my PTSD, I still get triggered, I still have depressive bouts, but now I'm in control of it. I know when it happens. I know when I can pull back and what I need and what I don't. Whereas young Jessica had no freaking clue and was just running through life like a reckless wrecking ball, you know?
Yeah.
And I really want people to know that it does work and it becomes less scary.
I want to make 2 points here as we're wrapping up, because we're pushing an hour and I want to be respectful of your time and the listeners' time and all this stuff. But I mean, because this is an awesome conversation. Like, I would love to sit down and just pick your brain about a bunch of other stuff and like have a beer and whatnot. But I do want to kind of put a bow on this. And there's 2 things that jumped out at me while you were talking. One reminded me of an interview I had with a guy named John King, who wrote a book called #Deal With It, and he literally has a hashtag in there. And he talks about his very similar type of upbringing. The events are different, obviously, different people, but same type of environment: abusive, neglectful, sexually charged, and there's this emerging trend towards something called CPTSD, or complex PTSD, that often accompanies people who struggle with personality disorders. And personality disorders, by and large, in our culture, have sounded like a death sentence, and I hate that. Like, I hate nothing more. I don't know. There's not too many things I hate, because I think hate's a very powerful word. I just have to catch myself there. But like, I really, really intensely loathe the idea that mental illness is unrecoverable, and especially certain types of mental illness are somehow quote unquote worse than others. And I think on this artificial hierarchy that whoever put it out there, whether it was our professors or our mentors or society in general, they've said that like personality disorders are the quote unquote worst because they're a long-standing pattern of behaviors, and you're just stuck with it. It's your personality now, and it's disordered. So screw it and good luck and God bless. And I think that that's horribly disempowering, and I think it's disgusting, and I think it's a terrible narrative to give people, especially when your testimony right now has said, no, not only can it be recovered and managed well, but we can spin this into a healthy way to go help other people, and I can learn from it, and I can like use it to empower myself, and like it. Not only is it not a death sentence, it can actually be a springboard into greatness. And I want people listening, if you've been into treatment before and you're listening to this podcast because you think I'm great or whatever, and that's okay to say. You can tell people that. But if you're just listening, you're like, yeah, Jake, I'm done with therapy, but I like listening, kind of at a distance, right? I can watch YouTube videos, and I can read articles, and I can download podcasts, and do all that stuff, and I can read books. But I'm just not going to the therapy office because I don't want a diagnosis, and I don't want to deal with the labeling and the judgment and the stereotyping and people telling me, poor you'll never recover. All you have to do is just go 3 days a week to emotional skills groups for the rest of your life, and you just merely have to white knuckle it through life. I would say to you, listen to Jessica's story and hear that recovery is possible for even some crazy messed up stuff, because I can tell you, like, just honestly, to a man, to a woman, whatever, through the microphone, if you were to walk into like a random run-of-the-mill clinic when you were struggling with the addiction stuff back in the day, and you had all that pattern of like unstable relationships, somebody would have slapped a personality disorder diagnosis on you. And depending on, and that may have been accurate at the time, who knows? But given whoever you may have talked to, they may have not let you out of that box. And they may have fed you some information like, well, here's the course of treatment. It is forever, and you'll never recover, and you're just always going to have these things going on. And that's like super damaging. I always want to speak hope into people. And so if you're listening and you're like, oh man, I've been in and out and through the ringer and all that stuff, like, remember that your therapist works for you. It's not the other way around. And if you're not happy with the treatment or care that you're giving, or you feel like you're being judged, fire him. Move on to somebody else who's going to meet you where you are and actually give you some help. And the second point that I want to make is the diagnosis itself. I really appreciate you. I'm proud of you for having this conversation and bringing normalcy to your life and your life's events, because I think what's keeping people from getting care is this series of judgments and stigmas that associate many different professions, from law enforcement and military to medical doctors and airline pilots to just gun owners. I mean, anybody who's a fan of the show has heard us talk to Mike Sedini from Walk the Talk America. Like, there's like large swaths of people who don't want to come into care because they're afraid of being labeled with this diagnosis that then goes up to whatever their bosses or their command staff, and then they're judged or deemed somehow like damaged or broken, and then they have like security clearances stripped, or they get demoted, or they get sidetracked off with, and then like the problem compounds because now you've lost your livelihood or your work identity, and like. Yeah. All I can say is go get treatment. Don't worry about whatever judgment is going to befall you from whoever it is, because the most important thing is you being healthy. If you're not healthy, you're not getting good to anybody anyway. And on top of that, like our suicide rate is through the roof for people who just don't get care. Thankfully, and I plug to the Nevada legislature here in the 2019 session, they passed a bill. It was AB 492, I think, if I'm not making that up. And it basically said workers' comp will now cover your PTSD if it's due to a work-related injury. So, like, if you're a first responder or paramedic and you just constantly show up to, scenes where there's human remains and you have to, like, watch over them for hours on end, that's now a workers' comp issue, which is amazing because we've normalized the experiences that we're asking these people to encounter. The next step, obviously, is normalizing it for the rest of the world who experiences things through no fault of their own, like upbringing or terrorist attacks or what have you. I mean, we need to get that stuff taken care of too. But please know that you can recover, you can return to full duty, and the more we have these conversations, I think the better off we're all going to be.
Yeah, and it's very true, and I think knowing that, understanding there's two things. Understanding, I love what you just said because I understand that. I remember when I first got that quote-unquote diagnosis or like discovered it for myself, I was like, fuck, I was bummed, really bummed. But what we have to realize is the name of these personality disorders, PTSD or bipolar disorder, whatever it may be, schizophrenia, whatever, they are all names. They are labeled and names just to be able to put a construct to your experience and your pain.
That's right.
To help you heal better. And it doesn't mean that you're labeled, and it doesn't mean that you have to identify that way. All it does is help you be able to have better healing. And just like you said, I love that. If your therapist isn't working for you, then get a new one, because my therapist changed my life. Genuinely, her name is Gillian Chachire, and she is in Portland, Oregon, and I have never had somebody help me, give me guidance and tools to heal myself better than that woman. And that's how you should feel. You should feel your safest, and you should be able to get the help that you deserve. And the last thing, the biggest thing to know is, like, no matter what your experience, whether it's as full as mine or it's one experience that has now tumbled you into something, for real change to take place, the body has to learn that the danger of whatever it is has passed, to live in the reality of the present. And
that's good.
all of this stuff that we've learned about trauma has led us to think differently about the body and the mind and how it can heal. And I think that's really important for people to know and understand.
That's really cool. Give a shout out to Jillian again and spell her last name.
Oh my God. Gillian Chachire. I'm going to botch spelling her name, but it's Gillian spelled with a G. And then her last name is Chachere. And her and her business partner, she has another therapist that works with her. I mean, genuinely has changed my life. I have been able to have a better grounding science understanding of what's going on. I have never been labeled in that room. She's only given me tools and constructs to be able to better understand my experience and live my life fully. I promise you right now, if I had not found her and walked into her office, I don't know that I would still be able to do the things I'm doing now. And I'm forever grateful.
We like to prop up the people who do good work.
Yes,
so thanks for doing that for Gillian.
Yeah.
And my bad for saying Jillian, not Gillian, but
no, it's okay. It's the same. It looks the same on paper. So.
Okay, one 30-second thing before we go. because it just popped in my head, because you're talking about the different types of exposures to trauma. So something that's interesting about our field is that our profession mostly didn't believe in vicarious trauma until September 11, 2001. And what happened was we discovered that through the repeated exposure to images on TV of the planes crashing in the buildings and the buildings crashing the ground and the people scrambling in D.C. and Pennsylvania, is that we all got traumatized. And we might call it acute stress disorder, which is the more short-term version, or PTSD, which is the more long-term version. But my personal testimony is I can remember walking downtown Reno to a candlelight vigil about 4 days after it happened. I was scanning the rooftops of the casinos, wondering if a plane was going to fly into the buildings. And I knew logically, you talk about frontal cortex, like logically I knew that wasn't possible because planes were still grounded at that time, but it still was in the back of my head. Like emotionally, the scarring was there because I just watched the images over and over and over and over on our old vacuum tube TV in college. And we then discovered that you can still have trauma effects even if you're living in Reno, Nevada, although the events transpired in DC and New York and Pennsylvania. So the message here is that be mindful of your intake on social media.
Yeah.
If you're watching negativity, whether it's in video form of some catastrophic event or it's just people's toxic expressions of contempt through politics or whatever, be mindful that what you take into your psyche will absolutely affect your mood, your physiology, the way you interact with others, your sleep patterns. So please be mindful of what you intake into your head, because now we have enough body of research to say, yes, vicarious trauma is a thing and it can affect you negatively. So thank you for letting me rant on that. Yeah. I always like to, I'm starting to do this a little more often. I in groups and like private session, personal sessions and supervision, I ask the class or the group or whatever, what's one thing that you're taking away from this? So, Jessika, I'm going to invert that question a little bit and ask you, what's one thing you want the listening audience to know about your experience?
Wow, about my experience. I guess if I could pick, really, if I could pick one thing, it's to be able to validate other people's experience. I hope through my experience that it could maybe validate someone else's. And I want people to know that their pain is real and it is valid and there is hope. But it does take work. I think that's something also to be mindful of, is that, it takes a little bit of work and you have to visit some uncomfortable things, and making sure you're surrounded with people that are going to support you in that is important. But there is healing and there is hope, and science even backs it up. So if you feel like it's not, I promise we can give you the information. But I just want people to know that like this stuff does work, and you will be able to live a better, fuller life with more control.
You couldn't see me, but I was fist pumping in the air because I thought that validating others was great. Good job.
It's really important, like, validate each other and then validate each other's experience. And maybe if you don't understand someone else's experience, that's okay, but don't discredit it. Right.
It's real for them.
Don't discredit it. Yeah.
Thank you, I guess. I should be thanking Boomer Perot for hooking us up on One a Week. If you want to check out One a Week, Boomer was on Noggin Notes a long time ago, probably a year ago, but now. One a Week Challenge. I think it's oneaweekchallenge.com. But if you want to reach out to Jessika or follow her, she's a good follow on Instagram. She puts a lot of motivational like workout posts and stuff like that. She's Miss Jessika, and that's Jessika with a K, remember. Facebook is jessica.alexander.5. And then your website, you want to tell your website, jessicaalexander.com?
Yeah, my Facebook's probably not a good place to go.
Okay, don't go to Facebook then.
But Instagram, yes. And then my website just is www.jessicaalexander.com. And then we also have Vessel Performance, which we'll be putting out content on. So be on the lookout for those things.
I just was scrolling and I saw something in June about, think you're drinking enough water? Find out right here. I was like, ooh, am I? That was on Facebook. That's why I was like, follow her.
I need to know.
Yeah.
hydrate myself.
Yeah.
So good.
Thanks so much.
Thank you so much for having me
you're
on.
great.
It was an honor, truly.
Yeah, honor to have you. I think a lot of people are going to get some real good healing out of this. I really appreciate it, and